Chapter 24. It was 5 in the morning. Venusia was in the porch, eating the samovar, and using the leg of a long boot instead of bellows. Olin had already ridden off to bathe in the Terek. He had recently invented a new amusement, to swim his horse in the river. His landlady was in her outhouse, and the dense smoke of the kindling fire rose from the chimney. The girl was milking the buffalo cow in the shed. "Can't keep quiet, the damn thing," came her impatient voice, followed by the rhythmical sound of milking. From the street in front of the house, horses' hooves were heard clattering briskly. And Olin, riding bareback on a handsome, dark gray horse, which was still wet and shining, rode up to the gate. Mayanka's handsome head, tied round with a red kerchief, appeared from the shed and disappeared again. Olin was wearing a red silk shirt, a white Circassian coat, girdled with a strap which carried a dagger, and a tall cap. He sat his well-fed, wet horse with a slightly conscious elegance, and holding his gun at his back, stooped to open the gate. His hair was still wet, and his face shone with youth and health. He thought himself handsome, agile, and like a brave, but he was mistaken. To any experienced Caucasian, he was still only a soldier. When he noticed that the girl had put out her head, he stooped with particular smartness, threw open the gate, and tightened the reins, swished his whip, and entered the yard. "Is tea ready, Venusia?" he cried gaily, not looking at the door of the shed. He felt with pleasure how his fine horse, pressing down its flanks, pulling at the bridle, and with every muscle quivering, and with each foot ready to leap over the fence, pranced on the hard clay of the yard. "Cypre," answered Venusia. Olin felt as if Mayanka's beautiful head was still looking out of the shed, but he did not turn to look at her. As he jumped down from his horse, he made an awkward movement and caught his gun against the porch, and turned a frightened look towards the shed, where there was no one to be seen, and whence the sound of milking could still be heard. Soon after he had entered the hut, he came out again and sat down with his pipe and a book on the side of the porch which was not yet exposed to the rays of the sun. He meant not to go anywhere before dinner that day, and to write some long postponed letters, but somehow he felt disinclined to leave his place in the porch, and he was reluctant to go back into the hut, as if it had been a prison. The housewife had heated her oven, and the girl, having driven the cattle, had come back and was collecting kisyak and heaping it along the fence. Olin went on reading, but did not understand a word of what was written in the book that lay open before him. He kept lifting his eyes from it and looking at the powerful young woman who was moving about. Whether she stepped into the moist morning shadow thrown by the house, or went out into the middle of the yard lit up by the joyous young light, so that the whole of her stately figure and its bright-colored garment gleamed in the sunshine and cast a black shadow, he always feared to lose any one of her movements. It delighted him to see how freely and gracefully her figure bent into what folds her only garment. A pink smock draped itself onto her bosom and along her shapely legs, how she drew herself up, and her tight-drawn smock shone the outline of her heaving bosom, how the soles of her narrow feet and her worn red slippers rested on the ground without altering their shape, and how her strong arms with the sleeves rolled up, exerting the muscles, used the spade almost as if in anger, and how her deep, dark eyes sometimes glanced at him, though the delicate browns frowned, yet her eyes expressed pleasure and knowledge of her own beauty. "I say, Olin, have you been up long?" said Beletsky, as he entered the yard, dressed in the coat of a Caucasian officer. "Ah, Beletsky," replied Olin, holding out his hand. "How is it you are out so early?" "I had to. I was driven out. We are having a ball tonight. Myanka, of course you'll come to Ustenska's," he added, turning to the girl. Olin felt surprised that Beletsky could address this woman so easily, but Myanka, as though she had not heard him, bent her head, and throwing the spade across her shoulder, went with her firm masculine tread towards the outhouse. "She's shy, the wench is shy," Beletsky called after her. "Shy of you," he added, smiling gaily. He ran up the steps of the porch. "How is it you are having a ball, and have been driven out?" "It's at Ustenska's, at my landlady's, that the ball is, and you two are invited. A ball consists of a pie and a gathering of girls. What should we do there?" Beletsky smiled knowingly and winked, jerking his head in the direction of the outhouse into which Myanka had disappeared. Olin shrugged his shoulders and blushed. "Well, really you are a strange fellow," he said. "Come now, don't pretend." Olin frowned, and Beletsky, noticing this, smiled insinuatingly. "Come now, what do you mean?" he said. "Living in the same house, and such a fine girl, a splendid girl, a perfect beauty." "Wonderfully beautiful. I never saw such a woman before," replied Olin. "Well then," said Beletsky, quite unable to understand the situation. "It may be strange," replied Olin, "but why should I say what is true? Since I have lived here, women don't seem to exist for me. And it is so good, really. Now what can there be in common between us and women like these? Eroshka, that's a different matter. He and I have a passion in common. Sport. There now, in common? And what have I in common with Amelia Ivanov? It's the same thing. You may say they're not very clean. That's another matter. A la grère, comme à la grère. But I have never known any Amelia Ivanovs, and I have never known how to behave with women of that sort," replied Olin. "One cannot respect them, but these I do respect. Well, go on respecting them. Who wants to prevent you?" Olin did not reply. He evidently wanted to complete what he had begun to say. It was very near to his heart. "I know I am an exception." He was visibly confused, but my life has so shaped itself that I not only see no necessity to renounce my rules, but I could not live here, let alone live as happily as I am doing, were I to live as you do. Therefore, I look for something quite different from what you look for." Beletsky raised his eyebrows incredulously. "Anyhow, come to me this evening. My uncle will be there, and I will make you acquainted. Do come, please. If you feel dull, you can go away. Will you come?" "I would come, but to speak frankly, I am afraid of being seriously carried away." "Oh, oh, oh," shouted Beletsky. "Only come. I'll see that you aren't. Will you, on your word?" "I would come. But really, I don't understand what we shall do. What part shall we play? Please, I beg of you, will you come?" "Yes, perhaps I'll come," said Olin. "Really now. Charming women. as one sees nowhere else, and to live like a monk. What an idea! Why spoil your life, and not make use of what is at hand? Have you heard that our company is ordered to Vodovensky? Hardly. I was told the 8th Company would be sent there, said Olin. No, I have a letter from the adjutant there. He writes that the prince himself will take part in the campaign. I am very glad I shall see something of him. I'm beginning to get tired of this place. I hear we shall start on a raid soon. I have not heard of it, but I have heard that Kronovstin has received the Order of St. Anne for a raid. He expected a lieutenancy, said Beletsky, laughing. He was let in. He has set off for headquarters. It was growing dark, and Olin began thinking about the party. The invitation he had received worried him. He felt inclined to go, but what might take place there seemed strange, absurd, and even rather alarming. He knew that neither Cossack men, nor older women, nor anyone besides the girls were to be there. What was going to happen? How was he to behave? What would they talk about? What connection was there between him and those wild Cossack girls? Beletsky had told him of such curious, cynical, and yet rigid relations. It seemed strange to think that he would be in the same hut with Mayanka, and perhaps might even talk to her. It seemed to him impossible when he remembered her majestic bearing, but Beletsky spoke of it as if it were all perfectly simple. Is it possible that Beletsky will treat Mayanka in the same way? That is interesting, he thought. No, better not go. It is all so horrid, so vulgar, and above all, it leads to nothing. But again, he was worried by the question of what would take place, and besides, he felt as if bound by a promise. He went out without having made up his mind one way or the other, but he walked as far as Beletsky's, and went in there. The hut in which Beletsky lived was like Olnin's. It was raised nearly 5 feet off the ground, on wooden piles, and had 2 rooms. In the first, which Olin entered by the steep flight of steps, feather beds, rugs, blankets, and cushions were tastefully and handsomely arranged, Cossack fashion. Along the main wall, on the side wall, hung brass basins and weapons, while on the floor, under a bench, lay watermelons and pumpkins. In the second room, there was a big brick oven, a table, and sectarian icons. It was here that Beletsky was quartered, with his camp bed and his pack and trunks. His weapons hung on the wall, with a little rug behind them, and on the table were his toilet appliances and some portraits. A silk dressing gown had been thrown on the bench. Beletsky himself, clean and good-looking, lay on the bed in his underclothing, reading Les Trois Mousquetaires. He jumped up. There, you see how I have things arranged? Fine. Well, it's good you have come. They are working furiously. Do you know what the pie is made of? Dough, with a stuffing of pork and grapes. But that's not the point. You just look at the commotion out there. And really, on looking out of the window, they saw an unusual bustle going on in the hut. Girls ran in and out, now for one thing and now for another. Will it soon be ready? Cried Beletsky. Very soon. Why? Is Grandad hungry? And from the hut came the sound of ringing laughter. Utstenska, plump, small, rosy, and pretty, with her sleeves turned up, ran into Beletsky's hut to fetch some plates. "Get away, or I shall smash the plates," she squeaked, escaping from Beletsky. "You better come and help," she shouted to Olin, laughing. "And don't forget to get some refreshments for the girls." Refreshments, meaning spice bread and sweets. And as my uncle come, of course, she brought some dough. "Do you know," said Beletsky, "if one were to dress Stenska up and clean and polish her up a bit, she'd be better than all of our beauties. Have you ever seen that Cossack woman who married a colonel? She was charming. Borshev? What dignity! Where do they get it?" "I have not seen Borshev, but I think nothing could be better than the costumes they wear here." "Ah, I'm first-rate at fitting into any kind of life," said Beletsky, with a sigh of pleasure. "I'll go and see what they are up to." He threw his dressing gown over his shoulders and ran out shouting, "And you look after the refreshments." Olin sent Beletsky's orderly to buy spiced bread and honey, but it suddenly seemed to him so disgusting to give money, as if it were bribing someone, that he gave no definite reply to the orderly's questions. "How much spiced bread with peppermint, and how much with honey?" "Just as you please." "Shall I spend all the money?" asked the old soldier impressively. "The peppermint is dearer. It's 16 kopecks." Yes, spend it all," answered Olin, and sat down by the window, surprised that his heart was thumping, as if he were preparing himself for something seriously wicked. He heard screaming and shrieking in the girl's hut when Beletsky went in there, and a few moments later saw how he jumped out, ran down the steps, accompanied by shrieks, bustle, and laughter. "Turned out," he said. A little later, Stenska entered and solemnly invited her visitors to come in, announcing that all was ready. When they came into the room, they saw that everything was really ready. Stenska was rearranging the cushions along the wall. On the table, which was covered by a disproportionately small cloth, was a decanter of shakir and some dried fish. The room smelt of dough and grapes. Some half-dozen girls, in smart tunics, with their heads not covered as usual with kerchiefs, were huddled together in a corner behind the oven, whispering, giggling, and sputtering with laughter. "I humbly beg you to do honor to my patron saint," said Stenska, inviting her guests to the table. Olin noticed my uncle was among the group of girls who, without exception, were all handsome, and he felt vexed and hurt that he had met her in such a vulgar and awkward circumstance. He felt stupid and awkward, and made up his mind to do what Beletsky did. Beletsky stepped to the table, somewhat solemnly, yet with confidence and ease, drank a glass of wine to Stenska's health, and invited the others to do the same. Stenska announced that girls don't drink. "We might with a little honey," exclaimed a voice from among the group of girls. The orderly, who had just returned with the honey and spice cakes, was called in. He looked askance, whether with envy or contempt, at the gentlemen, who in his opinion were on the spree, and carefully and conscientiously handed over to them a piece of honeycomb and the cakes wrapped up in a piece of grayish paper, and began explaining circumstantially all about the price and the change. But Beletsky sent him away, having mixed the honey with the wine in the glasses, and having lavishly scattered the 3 pounds of spice cakes on the table. Beletsky dragged the girls from their corners, by force, made them sit down at the table, and began distributing the cakes among them. Olin involuntarily noticed how Myanka's sunburnt but small hands closed onto 2 round peppermint nuts and brown ones, and that she did not know what to do with them. The conversation was halting and constrained, in spite of Utstenska's and Beletsky's free and easy manner, and their wish to enliven the company. Olin faltered and tried to think of something to say, feeling that he was exciting curiosity and perhaps provoking ridicule and infecting others with his shyness. He blushed, and it seemed to him that Myanka in particular was feeling uncomfortable. Most likely they are expecting us to give them some money, thought he. How are we to do it? And how can we manage quickest to give it and get away?